can you tell me what your name is and how to spell
My
it?
name is Brian Becker, B-R-I-A-N.
Oh, you're Brian Becker.
Yeah. I'm the national coordinator of the Answer Coalition.
That's fantastic. Okay, so what did the Washington Post do or not do specifically that you're targeting the Washington Post?
We've had 4 major demonstrations here in Washington since this crisis began, meaning the invasion and bombing of Gaza. Last Saturday we had tens of thousands of people. Because the Washington Post knew about the demonstrations, had reporters and photographers at the demonstrations, but decided not to carry even one article, not one word has been written about all of these protests right here in Washington, D.C. by a newspaper that prides itself on having very strong local coverage. We decided to come here today and dump the Post. Literally, as you can see, we brought wheelbarrows and dumped copies of the Washington Post on the street right in their front door. And we're here to send a dramatic message that it's unacceptable, especially when you consider the fact that not only is this a grievous war going on where thousands of people have been killed or wounded, but the Arab American community, which is an important part of Washington, D.C., came out in the tens of thousands, and yet we're totally ignored by the Post. It's as if the Washington Post can't see Arab people, either the suffering people in Gaza or the Arab American community right here in Washington, D.C. So we think that, too, is an act of racism and bigotry, the same way that the African American community decades ago was treated as an invisible force by the Washington Post. We're here to rectify what we consider to be extreme bias in terms of the Post coverage and racism against the Arab American community right here in Washington.
Now, since you're the national director, you're aware of what kind of coverage the other protests got in other cities, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that there are other newspapers that have also been a problem? I know Answer was having a protest against the San Francisco Chronicle for the same type of issue.
Yes, and also the Chicago Tribune today. We had demonstrations here in Washington against the Post, in San Francisco and in Chicago. In general, the American mainstream corporate-dominated media has been awful because they're echoing the U.S. government position, which is always to justify every act by the Israelis. Every time Israel strikes the people in Gaza, it's considered self-defense. Every time the Palestinians shoot back, it's considered terrorism. And at the same time, they've failed the coverage that the Israelis blockaded the people of Gaza for 18 months because in a democratic election, they elected Hamas, a government that didn't meet the approval of the Israelis or the United States government. And for that reason, the U.S. and Israel use food and medicine as a weapon against the people themselves for having voted the wrong way. And by all international definitions, that's an act of war when you blockade food and medicine.
Right.
So none of this has really come through in the corporate-dominated media. The Washington Post is an egregious example of bad coverage in the last few weeks, but I would give most of the American media an F- if that grade existed because of their terrible coverage on this issue.
Right. Do you see a similarity between them downplaying the demonstrations now and the way they downplayed the demonstrations against the beginning of the Iraq War?
I think it's even worse with this. I think in the Iraq War there was some divided opinion within the summits of the U.S. political establishment, including within the media, corporate-dominated media establishment, about the wisdom of going to Iraq, invading a country that had done nothing to the United States. When it comes to Israel, though, there's a consensus within the media and political establishment that Israel must be supported and defended always. And the reason is not because of the power of the Israeli lobby so much. Of course, it is a powerful lobby. But the real reason is that Israel, in this strategic oil-rich region in the Middle East, functions as something of an extension of American power. Israel is dependent on the United States, could not survive in the Middle East as a settler regime in such a sea of hostility with the indigenous people of the region without being dependent on a larger power, in this case the United States, which gives Israel $15 million every day. And so those who get $15 million a day are obviously dependent on those who give the money. And those who give the money is the U.S., it's the Pentagon, they're the ones who arm them. And as a result, Israel acts as a bludgeon or an attack force against others in the Middle East who are considered to be the enemy by the United States because these same forces in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine, previously in Iraq, in Iran, are trying to reclaim control over their own land and labor, and especially their resources, meaning oil, so that they, the people of the region, dominate their own lives rather than having their countries and their lives dominated by the United States.
Yeah.
So I think those are the geostrategic sort of calculations of the media, and as a result, you don't see much difference of opinion, and most of the media here, meaning not just in Washington but around the country, is terribly biased because it just reflects the official position of the U.S. government.
How many newspapers did people bring? Do you know how many?
I don't know, but it looks pretty impressive.
So they tore them up and they put them all over the ground in front of the Washington Post?
We dumped them in a wheelbarrow around the door.
And how did you know that the Washington Post came out to the protest?
The Washington Post sent photographers out here. I don't know if they had a reporter as well, but there was somebody with a Washington Post credential.
No, at the protest where you had like.
I spoke with the Washington Post reporter. He interviewed me.
Oh, wow.
And afterwards he called me back as he was finishing up his article. He wanted to know our crowd estimate from the earlier demonstration.
So he wrote an article and then his supervisors booted the article.
They pulled the article.
Eradicated the article. Wow. I bet he's not happy.
Well, he's unhappy, but we're less happy than he is.
Yeah.
It's the voice of the people that's being suppressed willfully by the editors. That's not news coverage. That's what you do for propaganda.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.